Southwest means that as we start off Saturday, it's 13 Celsius in the south, but it's cold in the north of Scotland, where it's also windy, 70-mile-per-hour wind gusts clearing the northeast of Scotland through the early hours, and further snow and ice issues as we start the day for northern Scotland. Brighter for central Scotland, some rain reaching southern Scotland during the afternoon, falling as snow over the southern uplands, and it's mild for much of England and Wales with rain on and off along with a strong wind and temperatures of 13 or 14 Celsius. Into New Year's Eve evening, the spells of rain continue to move northwards and it looks soggiest across central parts of the UK. I think southern areas turning drier for a time. The north of Scotland also drier with some snow showers in places. But the rain reaching the likes of Edinburgh by midnight and pushing north into central Scotland, falling as snow over the hills. Mild, meanwhile, further south with further showers following for Sunday. And New Year's Day does look a little brighter in part, but naturally these showers as they come through will be heavy. They'll move through quickly and it looks like later in the day it will be a bit drier across England and Wales, but further rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland. A drier spell on Monday with some sunshine, further rain coming in on Tuesday.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Right, it's 6 p.m. That means it's time for Dewbs & Co. with me, Emily Carver. So coming up, after Labour made the rather bizarre claim that not being able to pay your energy bills is an example of structural racism, is it time we gave the Labour Party a little bit more scrutiny as they gear up for a push for power? And as 2 NHS hospitals ban the majority of their visitors and instruct patients to wear masks on their wards, are we being nudged back into COVID restrictions? And as chaos mounts from the charging point to the road tax form, are electric cars already running out of steam? All of that to come on Dewbs & Co. this evening, and I'll be introducing my stellar panel in just one moment. But first, let's get the latest news headlines.
Emily, thank you. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The family of Elle Edwards, who was killed in Merseyside, have paid tribute to their most beautiful bright star. The 26-year-old was shot at the Lighthouse Inn on Christmas Eve while celebrating with family and friends. Police are urging anyone with information to come forward. A 30-year-old man from Tranmere, arrested on suspicion of the murder, has been recalled to prison. A 19-year-old woman from Rock Ferry has been bailed, and a 31-year-old man remains in custody. Sitting alongside Elle's father, Tim Edwards, Merseyside police read out the family statement.
She had this way about her that as soon as you met her, you instantly fell in love with her. Everyone that knew and met Elle knew how special she was. Her laugh was infectious. Anyone who was around her had a good time. She loved life and had so many amazing plans for the future. She was only just getting started.
West Midlands police have been given more time to question 2 men arrested on suspicion of the murder of a 23-year-old man on Boxing Day. Non-league football player Cody Fisher died following a knife attack at the Crane nightclub in Birmingham. The venue has since had its licence suspended, with police saying there had been serious management failings. Another suspect also remains in custody. Tributes continue to flood in for Dame Vivienne Westwood, who died yesterday at the age of 81. Singer Boy George describing her as the undisputed queen of British fashion. Tributes are also being left outside of her home in South London. Dame Vivienne was synonymous with 1970s punk rock, dressing bands such as the Pistols, celebrities, politicians and royalty. Her representatives say she died peacefully, surrounded by her family. While Brazil has begun 3 days of national mourning in honour of football legend Pelé, who died yesterday at the age of 82. Pelé had colon cancer and died in hospital. Widely regarded as the greatest footballer ever, he's the only man to win the World Cup 3 times as a player. On Monday morning, Pelé's body will be moved to the Urbano Caldeira Stadium of his former club Santos, where the public will be able to pay their respects. A procession through the streets of Sao Paulo on Tuesday will be followed by a private family burial. Former England goalkeeper Peter Shilton has paid tribute.
He was a gentleman, and wherever he went, he left a big impression, you know, and I mean, fans just adored him. You know, he as I say, never had a weakness, really. And, you know, to win 3 World Cups was, you know, incredible.
Romanian prosecutors have asked for a 30-day extension to the arrest of online influencer Andrew Tate, who's been detained on suspicion of human trafficking and rape. The former reality TV star, who was detained alongside his brother Tristan, had his house raided in the capital, Bucharest. The Tate brothers have been under criminal investigation since April. They've declined to comment, but their lawyer has confirmed their detention. Well, there were nearly 25,000 wildfires this summer, 4 times last year's figure and the highest in at least a decade. Firefighters tackled more than 50 wildfires a day at the peak of the heat waves between June and August, when temperatures reached as high as 40 degrees. Earlier this week, the Met Office said 2022 was the UK's warmest year on record, with above-average temperatures every month, apart from December. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Dewbs & Co. with Emily.
Thank you, Tatiana. So, I've been thinking recently that we've been going a little bit soft on the Labour Party here at GB News. Perhaps it's hardly surprising given the state of the country that there's been a lot of government bashing. But with the polls giving Labour such a massive lead, I reckon they need a little more scrutiny, don't you? So I want to kick off the show with something that you may have missed this week. Annalise Dodds, the Shadow Women and Equalities Minister, tweeted something rather bizarre and frankly offensive, in my view, that gives us a little bit of insight into how front and centre identity politics and frankly race baiting could be if Labour get their hands on power. Miss Dodds gave a couple of statistics on how black families are apparently 5 times more likely to be behind on their energy bills than white families, and 4 times more likely to be behind on their rent or mortgage. Underneath, she wrote, Labour will address racial inequality in government, including with a new Race Equality Act. So apparently, according to Annalise, the reason black families are falling behind on bills is because of structural racism. By that logic is the fact white working class boys are performing relatively badly at school because of structural racism against them too. And why are you more likely to earn more if you happen to be of Chinese or Indian heritage? It's all a bit confusing, but it seems Labour thinks any disparity among groups must be due to racism, rather than the many, many other factors that come into play. Then there's the fact we already have an Equality Act that is meant to protect against racial discrimination. I worry that a return to Labour will mean more hyper-racialised identity politics, and that this particularly condescending tweet is nothing more than a cynical attempt to exploit racial grievances. Let me know what you think on that one. It does remind me a bit of Jeremy Corbyn's ridiculously patronising assertion that only Labour can be trusted to unlock Asian and minority ethnic people, as if you can lump them all into one category. Anyway, also, last night I asked whether we should bring back mandatory COVID testing for travellers coming from China. You were very much divided in the inbox, although I must admit it seemed most of you disagreed with me. I argued that the government shouldn't give in to the pressure to be seen to act, not be swept up in a panic all over again, and avoid bringing in these types of rules. Now, it's been reported that a number of NHS hospitals are bringing back some of the restrictions we saw at the height of the pandemic. That includes mask mandates on wards and banning most visitors. Surely, as one Tory MP said, this is wrong and cruel. It seems you just need to give some people an inch and their thirst for power and control comes roaring back. Is that fair to say? Then, could the government actually be winning the battle against the unions? Seems a bit unlikely, but ministers are claiming that striking unions are running out of cash and could be forced to back down before the government is forced to give in. What do you think on that one? And lastly, I want to know if you've bought an electric vehicle. Would you? Or perhaps you have, and maybe have a little bit of EV regret. I'm asking because the AA has warned that drivers in the north aren't buying them because there are barely any charging points north of the M25. So that's what we're going to be getting stuck into this evening on Dewbs and Co. Let me introduce my wonderful panel. We have political strategist and former advisor to Tony Blair, John McTernan, and we also have director of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young, with us this evening. Of course, I also want to know all of your thoughts throughout the show. Please do get in touch with me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or on Twitter @gbnews, or my personal account, which is @Carver Emily. So it's time now to discuss the Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equalities blaming structural racism for the racial discrepancies in our ability to pay energy bills. Toby, I'll go to you first on this one. What do you reckon this is all about? Do you agree with me that it seems that once Labour get back into power, which looks highly likely at this stage anyway, identity politics will be front and centre?
Yes, I think it will be. Clearly, this is what is energising, giving a kind of sense of moral purpose to a lot of Labour activists, and the Labour MPs and the leaders are responding to that. But the notion that Britain is structurally racist is just flat out wrong. I mean, as you pointed out in your introduction, Britons of Chinese and Indian descent actually earn more than white Britons. In schools, the lowest achieving demographic are white working class boys. The highest achieving demographic, when I last checked, were Chinese girls on free school meals. People say, well, OK, maybe people of Chinese and Indian heritage are doing well. What about black Britons? Isn't that an example of racism? Well, that's not true either. I mean, if you look at the achievement of black Britons of African descent in schools, they're one of the highest achieving demographics as well, even though African, Caribbean, black Britons of African Caribbean descent, particularly boys, aren't doing so well. They're still doing better than white working class boys. So the idea that we're in a structurally racist, live in a structurally racist society where if you're not white, you're a second-class citizen is just complete nonsense. And it's not just nonsense; it's divisive nonsense, and it's not something the Labour Party should be going near.
John, do you accept the premise of what Annalise Dodds is saying? Do you believe that there is structural racism in this country? Because you have to believe that first in order to want to then have another Race Equality Act.
I believe there's inequality in the UK, and I believe there's racial inequality in the UK, and I believe that the Labour Party's task, and it will be when it's in government, is to tackle inequality, and therefore it is likely to legislate to update the race equality legislation and to tackle a range of inequalities. There's the inequality that working class
but this is the thing that
young men and women
I'm glad
face.
you mentioned class, because the Labour Party was meant to champion, you know, the rights of working class people, equality in that respect. It seems that they've chosen to favour the whole racial and also gender to a lesser degree, that debate, rather than...
The Labour Party has got an extensive programme of trade union reform legislation. It's going to give a huge amount... There's a Charter for Union Rights, Workers' Rights, which... it was launched by Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner at the last, not this Labour conference, the one before. So Labour's got a whole swathe of things to deal with working class people, working people, whole set of proposals there. In this case, you know, the origin of the commitment for Labour to tackle racial equality, to renew it, comes from Doreen Lawrence. Doreen Lawrence did a review for the Labour Party, and of all the senior figures in public life in the UK, she's surely one who is most failed by the racism of the Metropolitan Police. Is that structural? I think it is. I think it was structural. That's what the review found, and it's going to take a long time to root out some of the factors which actually discriminate, which put, you know, working class people, black working class people, a quarter of the working class in Britain are black or brown. What puts them into poor housing, what puts them into precarious jobs, what puts them into situations where their kids don't do well at university, those have to be tackled by a party that's committed to equality.
I'm
really
all
the Labour
for people
Party
looking into why people experience life differently and things that might hold them back or obstacles that they may need to overcome that other groups may not do. But I worry about what comes out of this type of stuff. What will be the recommendations? Will it mean more quotas? Does it mean we need to redistribute from white people to black and ethnic minority people who can't pay their bills? I mean, where do we go with this? It seems quite extraordinary that one would want to have an act because black families are struggling with their energy bills.
Yeah, it does seem extraordinary. I mean, the Commission for Racial... It was recently, published last year, the Commission for Racial and Ethnic Disparities, a big report produced by a group of experts which looked into the issue of whether Britain does suffer from structural racism. Most of the people who wrote the report were black. The chair of the report, Tony Sewell, was black. And they concluded that a lot of these disparities, which are often cited as evidence of structural racism, are actually to do with class inequalities, to do with poverty, to do with level of education, socioeconomic status. And once you control for all those factors, the evidence for any actual structural racism completely disappears. I mean, I think, you know, you're right to ask, well, what will the Labour Party do to tackle this? What will be in Labour's Race Equality Act? They haven't spelt it out yet, but I'm worried that it'll be like the proposal that Ibram X. Kendi has suggested in America, whereby he wants to set up a Department of Anti-Racism in the American government. He wants to pass an amendment to the American Constitution to make racism and racial discrimination punishable by prison sentences. And you can just imagine that people staffing this department, the power is bound to go to their heads, and they'll go around arresting people, accusing them of racial discrimination, accusing them of responsibility for racial disparities when really it's nothing to do with them, arresting people for being, you know, for having white privilege. I mean, where does it end? Well, I mean, the Labour Party, I think, you know, it may well win the next general election, but I think the more it leans into these identitarian issues, the more it embraces the trans rights activists' agenda, the more it embraces the racial equality, the anti-racism, the critical race theory agenda, the less likely it is to win the next general election. Because these policies alienate white working class people.
Well, they do alienate white working class people, but I think they also alienate people of ethnic minority background too, who don't particularly appreciate being lumped into one category, that is BAME. And I can't, for the life of me, understand why the Labour Party is still using that silly, outdated term. But we do have a little bit of information from Annalise Dodds on what that Race Equality Act might include. And apparently it means taking all of the recommendations from the Lamy review, which focused on criminal justice and how different groups are treated within the criminal justice system, and also making sure that our curriculum, she doesn't say whether that means in schools or in universities or in primary schools, in nurseries, etc., is diverse. It seems like they've decided that they want this Race Equality Act off the back of what Baroness Lawrence did with the COVID pandemic. She said that the COVID pandemic had hit races unequally. Apparently the pandemic was racist in one way or another. That's what the headlines were saying at the time anyway. But where do we go? Where are they going to go from this?
Well, it's really obvious that the way black people are treated in the criminal justice system is different from the way white people are. That needs to be dealt with, and the Labour Party, Keir Starmer...
But also crime statistics are different depending on
But Keir Starmer said it at the core, at the launch of this. He said, we're going to try to tackle these disparities at the core of them. So we have to tackle housing quality. One way of dealing with housing is simply to build the hundreds of thousands of council houses every year that need to be built.
But that's not a race issue. Why do they have to bring race into that?
Because I think we all agree, there's a point of agreement between all of us, which is that where there is class-based underachievement, class-based poverty, the issues of inequality really matter. Now, if we're quibbling about whether race and inequality is wrong to look at, but class and inequality is right to look at, we need to look at inequality. The Labour Party was founded to deliver equality. That's always been the core of the project. A large number of people, and in some of the stuff on the criminal justice system that David Lamy's review found, a disproportionate number of young black people are incarcerated. People get incarcerated for offences if they're black, get arrested, get cautioned in ways that white kids don't. And that needs to be dealt with. And that going into the criminal justice system can set you off the track for the rest of your life.
But John, Lamy used to, in his earlier work, talk about things that were much more interesting and much more real. For example, he spoke about family breakdown, absent fathers. He talked about all sorts. Figure. And now he seems to only talk about structural racism.
Well, he's now had a foreign secretary, so
in vague terms, and I don't think it's particularly helpful. Anyway, we must go to a break. Up next, we're going to be talking about 2 NHS hospitals which have recently banned visitors and instructed patients to wear masks on their wards due to rising COVID cases. Do you think Britain's going to start reintroducing draconian COVID restrictions? Let me know what you think. Back after the break.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. So I'm going to reintroduce my panel with me this evening. Political strategist and former advisor to Tony Blair, John McTernan, and director of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young, on my right. Now, we've got some breaking news tonight. The UK is set to announce that passengers arriving from China will need a negative COVID test before they travel as cases surge in the country. Britain has become the latest nation after the US, Italy and Spain, among others, to reintroduce restrictions for travellers from China, just as Beijing ends its cruel and draconian zero COVID policy. Toby, can I just get your quick take on this? Because I was arguing last night very strongly that the government should not do this.
Yeah, and I agree with you. We published a piece on the Daily Sceptic, the website I edit, this morning by Professor David Livermore at the University of East Anglia, arguing, I thought very persuasively, that this is completely pointless. There's no reason to suspect that dangerous new variants of COVID-19 are more likely to emerge in China than they are in the UK. After all, what we're talking about are vaccine-resistant variants, and not many people in China have been vaccinated with the mRNA vaccines. The vaccines which are prevalent in China are largely ineffective, so they're not going to stop the old variants, so there'd be no pressure for new variants to emerge. Whereas here, where most people have been vaccinated with the mRNA vaccines, new variants resistant to those vaccines are more likely to emerge, so this is completely pointless.
Yeah, it does seem a little bit of virtue signalling and a fear of not being seen to act, I would say. John, I'll ask for your opinion next, but we're going to move on to the hospitals situation, because COVID restrictions aren't just going to be on travellers from China, apparently. In another alarming hark back to the COVID restrictions of old, 2 hospitals have recently banned the majority of their visitors and instructed patients to wear masks on their wards. The bosses at Northampton General Hospital and Kettering General Hospital trusts say the move is needed to protect vulnerable patients on the wards from a significant increase in COVID and flu. However, Conservative MP Alice Kearns called the decision, in quotes, wrong and cruel. So, John, what do you think? Do you think it's just common sense? People should mask up if they want to go into hospital? Is this going to save us all from a nasty bout of COVID or flu?
We're in the 5th COVID peak in the UK. It's real. We've all...
Sorry, we're in the...
The 5th peak. Oh. It's the 5th peak of the COVID.
Breaking news as well. We're in the 5th peak
of the COVID. It's the, if you follow the cases, it's winter. We've got winter flu. We've got all of these things. It makes sense in hospitals, which are full of clinically vulnerable people. That's why they're there. That we should take the effort to be as safe and cautious as we can be about not spreading coughs and sneezes, flus. We know from care homes. My mum's in a care home. We know from the care homes that they've virtually eliminated norovirus and flu within care homes because of the extra hygiene measures brought in. It definitely is helpful for older, more vulnerable people to be protected, particularly over winter. I think it makes sense to have this kind of protection, and I don't think it's a great imposition on people to wear a mask to go into a hospital to see a relative.
You personally don't think it's an imposition, but others might see this as the first step on a rather slippery slope back to mask mandates on the tube, mask mandates in schools, etc., etc.
And something that does sound mandates on the tube.
Well, exactly. Some people just like this safety-first attitude, regardless of whether the well, the data really backs up that it did anything to stop the spread of COVID. I don't think we know that for sure one way or the other. But Toby, surely the most cruel thing about this, and I believe this is what this particular MP was talking about, is the fact that visitors are being limited already.
Yes, I think it is cruel. And one slightly misleading thing about this story, NHS hospital trusts have brought back mask mandates, is that many NHS hospital trusts across England and Wales and Scotland never lifted the mask mandates in the first place. But I think we do know that what the data tells us about mask wearing, and it tells us that wearing masks is almost completely, if not completely, ineffective at stopping transmission. There are no randomised control trials, which is the gold standard of scientific evidence, suggesting that wearing masks interrupts transmission of COVID-19. That's why Chris Whitty on March 4th, 2020 said wearing a mask if you don't have an infection reduces the risk of almost no one at all. They changed their minds, but not because the facts changed. They just changed their minds because they thought that insisting on masking up would send a signal that people were being more compliant and it would encourage them to comply with the restrictions. If mask mandates in hospitals were effective at preventing transmission, how come about 20% of infections at the height of the pandemic originated in hospitals? Clearly, masking in hospitals made very little impact, and to inflict this cruelty on visitors to hospitals and their loved ones is completely unnecessary.
It just makes me think back to, well, the rather terrifying times of the start of the pandemic or the height of the pandemic, where I was actually screamed at by a woman for standing on an open-air platform at a tube station for not wearing a mask. She demanded to see if I had a mask and demanded to then watch me put it on. Do we want to go back to this? I do genuinely worry that we're on a little slippery slope here. Richard says, I think if they try to bring in COVID restrictions, the vast majority will stick up two fingers. Will they? We've been quite malleable in the past.
Look, I want to agree with Toby that I think it makes no sense to apply to Chinese travellers conditions we apply to no other travellers. We've taken a
you do agree on that?
We've taken a decision in the UK that vaccination is the route to protection. I've had my winter booster, my flu jab, and I think China's death toll is going to be in China. Their crazy policy of zero COVID, followed by this crazy policy of opening everything up, is going to massively.
Do you think
damage
opening
that
up
country.
was the crazy policy?
They're both crazy. They're both crazy policies.
But everywhere that has opened up has seen a spike in COVID cases afterwards.
Nowhere's opened up without properly vaccinating their public, which the Chinese have done. So, but in terms of, is this a slippery slope? I think what it shows, truthfully, is we have a weak and inexperienced Prime Minister leading a weak and inexperienced government, and they will be buffeted this way and that way by the headlines, by what they fear the focus groups are thinking. They have no core ideology. They have no core view of how to run the country, whether it's the economy or whether it's health. They're blown this way and that way, and it shows their weakness that they've given in 24 hours, but for fear of headlines, not for fear of public health. And I think that's a big danger for the country to be led in that way.
I'd agree with John that Rishi Sunak is a fairly weak leader and the government is fairly weak, but let's face it, we'd be even worse off if Labour in power, they'd impose a lockdown tomorrow. It wouldn't be enough to mask. We'd all be confined to the underneath of our beds for time immemorial.
Only you.
Hang on, we're supposed to be scrutinising Labour this evening. Who will Keir Starmer be getting his advice from, Toby, do you think, when it comes to making these types of decisions? Will he make them in a different way to our current Prime Minister?
Well, the people advising the government over the course of the last 2.5 to 3 years over the pandemic, I think in due course will be found to have given very poor advice compared, say, to Anders Tegnell, the equivalent of Patrick Vallance in Sweden, who gave the correct advice at the beginning of 2020, which is don't lock down, it won't make any difference, it'll just cause unnecessary suffering and economic hardship. And he's been proved completely right. If you look at excess mortality, Sweden actually fared better than most countries which imposed a lockdown in 2020. Let's hope Keir Starmer ends up being advised by someone a little bit better, a little bit less nervous and risk-averse than the people advising Boris Johnson, but I very much doubt it. I imagine it'll be more of the same, if not worse.
I think if we've learnt anything from Keir Starmer is that he is very risk averse. And it seems that it may well pay off, the sort of sitting on the fence strategy, not giving too much away about what you really think about anything. It may be the winner.
He's actually a risk taker, to be honest.
Do you think?
Just one more point on this. Why I think
Very
actually
quickly.
things will be worse under Labour is because they say we justify interfering in people's liberty, taking liberty away in order to avert this not probable but possible catastrophe. It's a kind of risk aversion that applies to climate change, it applies to the lockdown. But if you combine that with a commitment to fighting racial injustice, then it becomes even worse. Then it becomes even worse because you're arguing, OK, if this catastrophe occurs, unlikely though it is, it will disproportionately affect vulnerable groups, and we have a moral duty to protect them. Therefore, we're justified in interfering with everyone's liberty to avert this rather remote but high consequence disaster.
That's a very good... We've put the case extremely well there, Toby, which is that it's the responsibility of government to take action to mitigate low-chance risks which have high impact. That's actually what governments are
Well,
there
there's a
for.
whole debate to be had about the word vulnerable.
Yes.
It seems to be used to describe anyone who's on a lower than average income, who's older than 50, who's, I don't know, got a minor disability. Everyone seems to be vulnerable these days.
Women,
I'm going to go to some...
people with red hair.
People with red hair, we are extremely vulnerable. 100% of gingers have been bullied for their hair at one point in their lives. I can certainly... that rings true with me. Anyway, Labour's Racial Equality Act, we were talking about that at the start of the show. They want a Race Equality Act to stop structural racism in this country. Of course, we already have an Equality Act, so I'm not exactly sure what is needed to be added to that. Anyway, Angie says Labour are trying to appeal to sections of society to garner votes for the next election. Watch them come up with a much more woke agenda in the next couple of years. Unfortunately, people get taken in by their rhetoric. I do think they are trying to take advantage of racial grievances for votes. Yes, I do agree with that. Doug says, just another party political attempt to gain black voters. David says, more Labour, absolute nonsense. Basically, we have a truly vile Tory government along with a truly vile government opposition. Britain is almost completely screwed. Fact. Well, there you go. Delightful. Happy New Year to come. Tim says, spot on, Emily. The left are the enemies of excellence and of striving to better oneself. They are also the enemies of our history and achievements. It is worrying. Thank you very much for getting in touch on those topics. I will read out some more. I think we're going to the break. Yes, we are.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Now, we were talking about before the break, sorry, my panellists are still talking, still chatting away. I think they're debating very interesting things. Anyway, before the break, we were discussing mask mandates in hospitals and also visitors being banned from some trusts visiting patients in hospitals, wondering whether this is a start of a creep back to more COVID restrictions or whether these are just common sense things that make sense during the winter months. Peter says, I have no doubt the government would love the opportunity to impose restrictions again. What a wonderful excuse to cover up their misgivings with regards to the present economy. That sounds a conspiracy, but perhaps there's some truth to it. David says, what part of COVID will always be out there? Does the medical profession not understand? But Elizabeth says, if wearing a mask saves one's life, it's worth it. And there we go, there's the safety first mentality, although we dispute in this room whether they were particularly effective or not. Anyway, we're going to be moving on to strikes. As ministers claim that striking unions are running out of cash, leaving them on the brink, are the government actually winning their battle against the militant union barons, if you can call them that? We'll delve into that right now. Toby, what do you think? We've seen reports that these strikes are costing the unions and their members huge amounts of money. Do you think the government perhaps is playing a blinder by just holding out until they're cash-strapped?
Well, I think it's a tactical move on the part of the government. By saying that the unions are likely to run out of money, they're essentially signalling to the unions that they're willing not to blink for the time being, and it's up. The ball is in their court. It's a way of applying pressure on them to settle. They're saying we're just happy to wait it out until you run out of money. So that's not in your interest to do that, because if you do that, you're going to lose. So it's in your interest to come to the negotiating table and accept the pay board recommendations, which is a pay rise of between 4% and 5%.
Yes. Now, my lovely producer made me a fantastic brief. Where she has highlighted just how much these strikes are costing the unions. So the Border Force officials who are on strike, their union is spending £1 million a month on strike pay. It only has a £4 million strike fund, so that would be depleted quite quickly. The RMT union has £18.6 million in its main funds. But again, the strike action is costing millions for them too. So could they genuinely simply run out of money?
No, because there's two things to say to that. One is the RCN have never had a strike in all of their existence.
True.
Their strike fund is £50 million. That's the first thing, which is there are some unions which are probably closer to the heart of the public who've got enough money to see the government out.
But hang on, John, you say they have 50 million in the bank. Apparently it costs 5 million a day to fund a strike.
And unions have learnt from the ambulance workers strike that was broken by Ken Clarke when he was Health Secretary, and from the miners' strike broken by Thatcher. Nobody does all-out strikes anymore. Think of you only need to strike for a few days on the railway and only a few workers on the railway. If you take out the signalmen, you can disrupt the entire network at the cost of only taking out the signal workers. And so the unions are being canny, and I think the problem that the government have got here is they've briefed something which is going to anger union members. They're basically saying, I think Toby's got the psychology right. And the thing about strikes is they're not logical, they're psychological. These strikes come from anger. There's loads and loads of studies of strikes over time. No union member ever wins enough in a strike to pay back the money they lost in their earnings during the strike. They're making a point. The point is these workers have had their pay pushed down so hard in the health service particularly that there are shortages because you can't recruit people to work at the pay they're offered.
So essentially it doesn't matter how much money they lose because fundamentally this is a battle to the end.
It's a battle of the wills.
Battle of the wills.
I'm not sure about that. I think it might become harder and harder to persuade workers to go out on strike, given that even though they are paid when they strike, they're not typically paid as much as they would earn if they weren't out on strike, which is why, as John says, they lose money when the strikes come to an end usually. But, you know, in the current climate, where we're experiencing heavy pressure on things like energy bills, food bills, how much, for how long can those workers, put up with being paid what they wouldn't normally be paid, less than they'd normally be paid, just to make a psychological point?
Do you think the parallels the government are trying to draw between the current situation and the 70s are working, Toby? Do you think people, the general public, do see this as as similar to the 70s, therefore the government needs to tackle the unions so they're not running the country?
Yeah. I mean, I lived through the first winter.
Did you really?
I did. I was in my teens.
Hard to believe, isn't it, John?
Hard to believe, and I look very young. But it was much worse then, with the rubbish piling up on the streets and with power cuts. So we're not quite there yet. And I don't quite... It doesn't seem like a brilliant analogy for the government to come up with, because after all, that did for the Labour government at the time and led to a landslide for the then opposition party, the Conservatives led by Margaret Thatcher. So let's hope for Rishi Sunak's case it isn't the winter of discontent 2.0.
I think that's... Look, I think that is right. I think the difficulty with this is you can't see the government have any strategy apart from standing firm against everybody. If I was in number 10, I'd be going, let's pick people off bit by bit. The thing about strike action is, when you're on it, you're committed to it. When you come off it, it's really hard to make you go out again. So if you can find a way to take a group of workers off strike into negotiations, it's really hard to go back and pretend to go back on strike again. Create a process. Doesn't matter what the process is, just divide and rule, a salami slicing approach. And I don't see any subtlety to the government approach. And this is a sledgehammer, isn't it? You're going to run out of money, you're going to lose. Well, that angers people, and anger is a fuel of the strike and the conflict. You want to take anger out of it, you want to be reasonable, you want to seem rational, you want to seem in control. The Sunak, the Sunak approach should be, I'm calming everything down. That was what he said on economics, that he said on replacing, Liz Truss, I'm calming it down. So
you say that you need to act rationally and sensibly and calmly, but I do think it's fair to say that some of the leaders of the unions, particularly Mr Mick Lynch, perhaps haven't acted in that way themselves. You see the picket lines, everyone waving flags with socialist workers of the world unite and whatnot, get the Tories out, bring them down, whatever it is, refugees welcome. It's not all, calmness and tranquility from that side, is it?
No, and you certainly get the impression that, it may well be anger on the part of ordinary workers who've seen their wages fall in real terms as a result of inflation that's prompting them to go out on strike. But that's being exploited, I think, by the leaders of the trade unions who clearly are trying to score a big political point. They want to try and discredit the government. And maybe, I don't know what John thinks about this, but maybe the reason the government has said this very provocative thing about the unions not being able to afford to strike for much longer is because they want them to go on, because they think actually the Conservative government is benefiting politically from this strike, and Labour, the opposition, is suffering. Because it's quite difficult for Keir Starmer. Should he support them? Should he not? Should he condemn them? And it feels like it's more damaging for Labour in the long run than it is for the Tories.
But I do actually think, John, that it is selfish for Mick Lynch in particular. I'm only talking about the rail strikes here. He's on his nice six-figure salary, right? He doesn't lose his pay when they go on strike. But he's pushing and pushing for them not to accept this pay settlement, which other rail unions have taken. And I'm just thinking, it does seem, at least in the case of the rail, it's a massive ego trip for him. He loves going out on the media, talking about the evil Tories and whatnot. He's good at it in a way. Some people like him, some people think he comes across as a bully boy. But has the ego taken over, at least when it comes to the rail?
The thing about Mick Lynch, which really annoys ministers, I think, is that Mick's got a sense of humour, and Mick is self-deprecating. He makes fun of himself.
Self-deprecating? I've never seen that. Go on, give me an example.
In interviews when he's asked a question, he quite often has a little chuckle. And then does
it's a game to him.
No, it's that he understands that there is a presentation of his case, and there's the case of the government. Mick Lynch knows there's a deal to be done. The problem is the employers aren't free to make the deal. Now, the employers know, and Mick Lynch knows this too, there's inefficiencies in the rail. They've got to be taken out. Driver-only operated trains have got to be brought in across the network. That's part of modernisation. This fight shouldn't be one in which the government takes a side. The government's very strange on this. The government could say to everybody, just work from home while the strike is on. It's fine, just work from home. The government has walked itself into a situation where it could be standing back off the strike, going, it's for the employers and it's for the unions to settle this one. And that's what I don't understand. It goes back to my thing. I don't know what the absolute core proposition of this government is.
Well, it seems to be we can't afford. Their position is we can't afford inflation. Pay rises across the public sector. Therefore, we need to stick in.
Public sector pay doesn't increase inflation, as you know.
No, I'm not saying it increases inflation. I don't agree with that. What the government says, that there'll be a wage price spiral and that these wages will contribute to inflation and push it up further. I don't buy that, presumably because a lot of that money will go directly to pay for energy bills and general cost of living that's going up anyway. But I do take the point that across-the-board public sector pay rises would be extremely difficult for us to pay for right now.
Oh, look, the government just needs to change its fiscal rules, and the government has never.
Just manipulate the fiscal rules a bit, borrow a bit more, print a bit more.
It's a government which in 12 years has never met one of its fiscal rules. It creates fiscal rules to create black holes, to then force down public sector pay. They invented austerity, the pretense that Britain was Greece. Great Britain was never going to be Greece, but the Tory government pretended, and therefore we had to have austerity.
I think quite a lot of people would like the government to get public spending under control, so that we don't have to continue to borrow at high rates.
Yeah, I don't think the current black hole is an invention of the Tory government. It's a result of spending, something like £500 billion in order to pay people to stay at home and not work during the disastrous furlough policy.
Loads of us worked when we were at home.
Yes, loads of us did.
I've probably never worked at more hours.
A lot of people didn't, and certainly people weren't particularly productive.
Oh, I was incredibly productive.
Well, in some parts of the public sector they weren't. We know what happened with the passports and other government agencies. They essentially, someone said, from the inside, we were just watching Netflix and putting our feet up. Don't you remember that?
Teachers were incredibly productive. GPs doing telemedicine were incredibly productive.
Like in any profession, it depends on the GP, it depends on the teacher, it depends on the whatever.
One thing that's always puzzled me, Emily, about people working from home is when you ring up the DVLC, and they say there may be delays because we're working from home. It's like, well, wait a minute. If you're not commuting every day, why are there any delays? Why aren't you actually being more efficient than you would normally be if you're working from home?
Did they actually say there might be delays?
That's the excuse you get whenever you call anyone. You're put on hold and you get a recurring message played over and over again saying there may be unusual delays because we're working from home due to the disruption from home.
I must say that
I phoned HMRC this afternoon and I got that.
Exactly that message. Yeah.
I must say that during the pandemic, I worked extremely long hours because there was nothing else to do.
Exactly.
I was sat in front of my laptop. Yes, but it was one of those jobs that you can do from home. Everything just went simply digital. Anyway, they were once all the rage, but now they're making drivers enraged. After the break, I'll ask my panel if they own an electric vehicle and do they even want to. Stay tuned.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Yes, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. With me until 7 o'clock is my panel, political strategist and former advisor to Tony Blair, John McTernan, and director of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young, of course, with me this hour. Now, we were talking before the break about the strike action. Could the unions run out of cash and be forced to back down from the strikes? We had difference of opinion on the panel. You've been getting in touch. Now, John said that Mick Lynch has a great sense of humour. Louise fundamentally disagrees with you there. She says, Mick Lynch, a sense of humour, don't make me laugh. He's so far up himself, it's not possible for him to have one. So apparently you've got a better sense of humour than Mick Lynch there. Peter says, is this a Tory ploy to bankrupt the unions and starve the Labour Party of funds? I doubt they're thinking that far ahead, to be honest. I think they're just trying to get through this winter.
From strike fund.
They've ring-fenced.
Oh, well, there we go.
That's gold-plated.
Thanks to Margaret Thatcher, that money's ring-fenced.
Michael says, spot on, Emily. Union leaders don't lose a penny during industrial action. And Paul says Lynch is Scargill 2.0. So there we go, a variety of views that you've been sending in this evening. Now, finally, as we continue to buy more and more electric cars, pressure is apparently mounting on the government and local authorities to provide the charging points to be able to charge them all up. While we now have some 36,000 chargers in the UK, this is clearly nowhere near enough, given that there are now over 620,000 battery electric cars in the UK currently. So given that these cars are so expensive to buy, run and find a charging point for, have electric cars run their last race? Toby, the AA today has warned drivers in the north won't invest in electric cars because nearly half of the UK's charging points are actually in London and the South East.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I actually flirted with the idea of getting an electric car last year, and not a day passes when I don't thank the Lord that I didn't get one. I mean, first of all, they don't seem to be working very well when the weather drops below zero. We've seen lots of stories in America in particular during the cold snap on the East Coast with Teslas no longer working. Even in the South, where there are more charging points than there are in the North, there aren't enough to complete long journeys. There have been plenty of stories in the papers about people stranded trying to get home from their in-laws over the Christmas break. They're not going to be much cheaper than petrol or diesel cars shortly, given the price of electricity. And it's not surprising, actually, that Tesla's share price has fallen by 70% over the past year. I don't think that's because, Elon Musk is distracted trying to run Twitter. I think it's because people are realising
He's trying to get rid of Twitter now, isn't he?
I think he's trying to pass on the headship. I don't think he's trying to get rid of it. But I think people are realising that, electronic vehicles are no longer the transportation of the future, and I'm just glad I never bought one.
Yes, I think what is quite interesting, and I didn't know this, but it makes sense, of course, because it's an electric vehicle, is that if you run the heating, that depletes the battery very quickly. Do you drive an electric vehicle, firstly, John?
No.
No. Would you buy one if you had to buy a car?
I will when they're a stable technology. They're not a stable technology yet, so I'll buy them when they're being commodified, when rich people have bought them, when they've learned everything they can about them. But all the evidence is that electric vehicles are cheaper to run than diesel or petrol cars because there's only one thing in them. That's the battery. There's not, and that runs the wheels. There's not many parts for servicing, so service costs are low. The mileage is very, very low because electricity is cheaper than petrol. Electricity itself can be generated renewably, which is why we have to shift to electric vehicles. And the thing for me that confuses me is all the petrol companies know they're going to have to stop selling petrol and start selling electricity. And so the issue is, why are they not stepping in? And I know why they're not stepping in to provide charging points north of the M25. They're doing that because they're waiting for a government subsidy, and it's a game of chicken. And they can see if there can be enough fuss in the press, then there'll be a government subsidy. I've never seen a private company not anxious for a government subsidy, and I think the government needs to stare them down on this one. I think, look, we can't get to tackle climate change if we replace every single diesel car or petrol car with an electric vehicle. People are going to have to give up their cars. And that's the big thing, and no one wants to talk about that. We're going to have to bring in road charging to replace petrol tax.
Well, that's coming next, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I was talking to a lady earlier who's bought an electric vehicle, and she was umming and ahhing about it. And she says there's definitely, honestly, she said there are definitely pros and cons. It only has 130 mile mileage, so it can only go 130 miles. Range, that's the word I was looking for. Only has a 130-mile range, so it's no good for driving up to, say, Manchester from London or up to Newcastle. There's also the anxiety, the range anxiety that comes with that, whether you are going to be able to find a charging point in time. And it's also been in the news a lot that people have been waiting hours to get to an electric charger. Do you think there might be some people with a bit of electric vehicle regret?
I think there might be a bit of buyer's regret in the electric vehicle market. I mean, one point to make is that, you know, people imagine that by scrapping their old cars and buying a brand new electric car, that they're doing their bit to tackle climate change. But the carbon emissions involved in producing a brand new car, even if it's an electric car, are far greater than any carbon emissions you're going to produce by continuing to drive your diesel or petrol-driven car. It's a ludicrous form of virtue signalling, typical of the green lobby.
Toby's right.
Very quickly, we're going to have to wrap up.
Toby's right. The cars are the problem. It's not. We need fewer cars, more buses.
Right, I'm just going to read out one comment because we're going to have to end the show very quickly. George says, I may have missed something, but when it comes to road tax, don't electric cars use the roads in exactly the same way as the rest of us? Yes, and that's why I think they're probably going to slap that tax on everyone soon enough. Thank you very much for tuning in this evening. That's all we have time for tonight. We had Toby Young, of course, and John Whitturnan with me from 6 o'clock. Thank you very much for getting in touch. That's all for now. Lawrence Fox next.
Hello again, Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office. It was a thoroughly soggy start for many of us this morning, but the rain eases this afternoon. Further showers in the west, and it's going to be mild for many, especially in the south, where we've got this southwesterly airflow. Across northern Scotland, it's a different story. Low pressure here, bringing colder air, and a feature in the far north, bringing some persistent rain and hill snow during the rest of Friday to the Northern Isles, north of the mainland, and then that snow reaching lower levels overnight. But elsewhere it's mild, and after a brief interlude of drier weather, further rain sweeps in from the southwest overnight. Spells of wet weather on and off England, Wales, southern Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland seeing showers as well. A breeze coming from the southwest means that as we start off Saturday, it's 13 Celsius in the south, but it's cold in the north of Scotland, where it's also windy, 70-mile-per-hour wind gusts clearing the northeast of Scotland through the early hours. And further snow and ice issues as we start the day for northern Scotland. Brighter for central Scotland, some rain reaching southern Scotland during the afternoon, falling as snow over the southern uplands, and it's mild for much of England and Wales with rain on and off along with a strong wind and temperatures of 13 or 14 Celsius. Into New Year's Eve evening, the spells of rain continue to move northwards, and it looks soggiest across central parts of the UK. I think southern areas turning drier for a time. The north of Scotland also drier with some snow showers in places, but the rain reaching the likes of Edinburgh by midnight and pushing north into central Scotland, falling as snow over the hills. Mild, meanwhile, further south with further showers following for Sunday. And New Year's Day does look a little brighter in part, but naturally these showers as they come through will be heavy. They'll move through quickly, and it looks like later in the day it will be a bit drier across England and Wales, but further rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland. A drier spell on Monday with some sunshine, further rain coming in on Tuesday. I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbs, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewbs, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs & Co.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Do not adjust your sets. Yes, I am here for one last time in 2022 before we wave goodbye to this year and welcome in the next. First of all, we're going to talk about COVID. Yes, there are travel restrictions again and people are wearing masks again. But what I want to talk to you about is research, research, research. We shouldn't be afraid to talk about the good, the bad and the ugly when it comes to research, and that's what I will be doing to kick off the show. I will be asking Dr. Asim Malhotra about his recent study and Andrew Bridgen MP, who has come under attack for speaking out in Parliament. Then, to round it all off, we're ending on some musical festive cheer with Winston Marshall and a song about a laptop. All of that, maybe more, coming up after the news.
Lawrence, thank you. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Now, it's understood that the government is set to introduce mandatory COVID testing for travellers arriving from China. Anyone travelling to the UK would require a negative pre-departure test. It comes amid concerns about surging case numbers following an easing of restrictions in China. Countries including France, the US and India have already implemented similar rules. Police have named a man they're urgently trying to trace following a serious sexual assault on an elderly woman in London's Notting Hill Gate. The incident took place on the evening of the 23rd of December. The victim is aged in her 70s. The Met say they're trying to trace 35-year-old James Becks of no fixed address. They're urging members of the public not to approach him if spotted, but to call 999 immediately. The family of Elle Edwards, who was killed in Merseyside, have paid tribute to their most beautiful bright star. The 26-year-old was shot at the Lighthouse Inn on Christmas Eve while celebrating with family and friends. Police are urging anyone with information to come forward. A 30-year-old man from Tranmere, arrested on suspicion of the murder, has been recalled to prison. A 19-year-old woman from Rock Ferry has been bailed, and a 31-year-old man remains in custody. West Midlands police have been given more time to question two men arrested on suspicion of the murder of a 23